Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Kilayim chapter 1, Halacha 4 in the Art Scroll 3b1. And if you want to do it with a daf, please check out Halacha 3, chapter 1, Halacha 3, because it's very short. And if you're going to put it together in the Art Scroll, it's basically going to be a daf. Now, Halacha 4 is going to get into another set of plants that are going to be set up like pears, and we actually are going to be covering pears. That's right, we're covering fruit trees and fruits, because all of a sudden, we were talking about gourds and we were talking about leafy vegetables and lettuce and things like that, and now we're going to be getting into the next set, because yes, you can have Kilayim with trees as well. And so here's how it's going to work. And again, we're talking about with grafting now, because we know that, as we covered in the general introduction to Kilayim, that there's 5 sets of Kilayim that are problematic. We have shatnets, but one of the other things that we have is going to be grafting. Grafting is going to be problematic as well. So if you're grafting a tree that's going to be a variety of another tree, that's not going to be grafting. It's not a problem. For instance, let's say you have a tree that is a black fig tree, and you graft on, for whatever strange reason, but you graft on a white fig branch onto it, well, that's going to be a variety of one another. Now, we know that in Masechet Shvius that the white fig is going to be considered inferior because it takes 3 years to grow, and the black fig can, grow 2 crops in 1 year. So, for whatever reason, this guy goes and he grafts on the white fig branch onto the black fig tree. It's not going to be Kilayim with one another because it's a fig tree. It's the same variety. But if you wanted to graft on a lemon onto that fig tree, you would have a problem. And by the way, you can graft on very different kinds of trees, like a lemon branch onto something like a fig tree. That might work. But the point is that you as the Jew are not allowed to do it. And not only that, it's one of those laws that not only can you not do it in Eretz Yisrael, but you can't do grafting outside of Eretz Yisrael. And something else is going to be coming up in this Gemara is going to be, well, what happens if a non-Jew does it? Are you going to be able to benefit from that? And we're going to get into that Gemara today. So the Mishnah says, and as for trees, pears, and crustamlin. And don't mistake it as I was just doing, where I was saying like crustamelon. It's not a crustamelon, it's a crustamlin. And it has nothing to do with a melon. A crustamlin, and I was looking this up before we did the shiur, is a type of pear. And so we know that, as I've been covering and talking about in the Masechet Shvius, that in the north of Eretz Yisrael, they do a lot of grafting for pears, because just planting pears in the north of Eretz Yisrael, it's hard to get a lot of agricultural quality crop that you could do for like a very big volume to feed a country. You could do a couple of trees, right? But to do very large volume, that's hard to do. So they're taking something that's related to a pear, and they are going to be grafting it on. They'll be taking quinces, and they'll be the quince trees, and then grafting pears on top of those. Those are going to be problematic. But right now we're talking about 2 things that are going to be varieties of one another. We're talking about pears and crustamlins. Again, not crustamelons. It has nothing to do with grafting a pear to a melon. Again, we covered that yesterday, that we're not talking about any case of grafting a plant from a tree with something from a vine. That is something that we're not talking about, because it's impossible to do. We're talking about something that is coming from a tree and a tree. And, can you, what is this, strange, kind of pear that we're talking about? Roman authors are going to say that it's a small pear, like a gallnut, and the Aruch is going to be saying that it could be a very superior form of pear, and also Roman authors are going to mention something like that, and they're going to call it a crustamine. So perhaps that's what we're talking about. Then you have the next pair. You have a quince and an azarol. Now, the quince is a very famous kind of hard fruit that you will still find today. and this is going to be like an apple that you have to boil. It's the only fruit that you can't just eat it. You have to boil it and cook it thoroughly in order to eat it. And you will still see it in the grocery stores today. And it's really like an ancient food, but again, it takes processing. So you have the quince and the azarol, and the azarol, this is going to be identified as like a type of, it's coming from the type of sorb, and the Rishonim, like the Rashi, are holding that it's a fruit of the service tree, and the French word that Rashi is going to be referring to it is the sorb, and this is going to be something that might look like a quince, and so again, but it's hard to figure out the exact precise name of what that is, or exact which variety it could be. Maybe that's not it. Anyway, the Mishnah says that they are not Kilayim with each other, so that if you grafted on the branch of the azarol tree and onto a quince tree, it would be fine. But as you see here from these pears, and we're talking about pears, that if you grafted the pear onto the quince tree, now you have a problem, because the pear and the crostamlin are in one set, and then you have the quinces and the azarols in the other set. So you can't mix the two sets. You can only do it within its own set. And that's the problem with the grafting that they're doing. I don't know how they have a heter to do this, but that's part of. And by the way, it's only in these orchards that are less religious. But anyway, there are a couple of orchards that do have pears that are like Ada Heredis, and they don't do this kind of stuff. But as you see, what the problem would be is that they're taking, the quince, they're cutting off part of the trunk of it, and they're putting a pear tree on top of the quince tree, because apparently the quince tree is going to be more robust in the north of Eretz Yisrael than a pear tree. But as you can see here, you can't just mix and match, because the pears are in a different pear. There is a pun there. Okay. Anyway, the following three pairs of trees are forbidden. It will go on to the next set. It says the apple and the chizrar. And so again, the following three pairs are forbidden, right? Not allowed. Then it says the peaches and the almonds. Then it says the jujubes and the thorn jujubes. And it says, even though they are similar to one another, they are Kilayim with each other. So why would it be for peaches and almonds? Well, go eat a peach, and you will see that there's a seed inside. There's a stone, and you crack open the stone, and that stone will have inside of it something that looks like an almond. In fact, it really looks like an almond. It's not an almond. And in fact, if you bite into it, it'll be very, very bitter. But in the taxonomy, it has something that looks like this part. And as we saw in Halacha 3, that we're identifying, even though sometimes it might be actually in the Linnaean system a completely different species from one another, we have in the taxonomy something where the leaves will look the same, or it'll have the same nutrition, or it will have the same appearance. And over here, there's a part of the peach that has the same appearance as the almond. And this is here to dispel that, these are Kilayim with each other. Even though you have this part in similarity, it's not. And then you have the apple and the chizrar. Well, some, like the Rosh, are going to say that it's a variety of apple, but the Aruch is going to be saying that, look, this is where it's saying that hizrar is the Aramaic word for apple, and the Rosh is going to be saying that this is a type of apple that was thrown to pigs. But again, which exact type, the Rambam is actually going to say that this is a medlar. So this is going to be from Mispilus Germanica. And so that's the Rambam commentary. Again, you have these things that might look the same, and they might have similar parts even, but they are Kilayim with each other. What about the jujube and thorn jujube? Well, you have the names that sound the same, but again, they might have this like. By the way, the Rambam says that this is a Chinese date, and it's coming from a shrub, and it's a berry-like fruit. And in Rashi in Yoma 81, he's going to identify it as a kind of plum, and so that these are very different. In fact, two different species. Even if they have something that have some sort of resemblance, it's actually going to be two different species, even if it looks the same. Rambam, by the way, is going to be pointing out a plant on the thorn jubjub that is something called the Ziziphus spinachar. Anyway, so it says, even though they are similar to one another, they are Kilayim with one another. And that's the point. Why are they Kilayim? It's because it's a different species. So perhaps it's not as similar as you think. So the Gemara gets started, and it says about the quinces, and the Gemara is going to give the Aramaic name for the fruit. Rabbi Yonah says that they are asparagine. That's what the Rabbi Yonah says. He's trying to, again, identify it. And again, I want to point out that the quince is like a rock. You have to cook it first. And there are like classic French cooking dishes with quinces. They make them into pies and things like that. And they can be quite good. Anyway, Rabbi Yonah is going to explain the word used in the Mishnah as the perishin. What is the perishin? Why are they called perishin? And what does that mean? And that says because no species of fruit tree is designated for the pot set aside to be cooked aside from this species. In other words, it's trying to describe that the quince is, because this one is different from all the other fruits in the world, you have to cook it. And that's why it's using designated. Now, the Mishnah is listing 4 fruit trees that are not Kilayim with each other, and the Gemara is going to give an Amoraic dispute as to how this Mishnah should actually be interpreted. So Shalman bar Levi, the brother of Zavdi bar Levi, says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, all of them, the first 4 fruit trees listed in this Mishnah, are grouped in pairs. That's going to be like the pear and the cristamlin, the quinces and the azarols. And each tree is going to be permitted only with the pear and not with the other sets. That is the reading according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. There's a dissenting view. The Gemara says, Rav says all 4 are one species, and accordingly, each tree may be grafted to any of the other trees. And by the way, that is going to be the source of this heter for what we're seeing in the north of Eretz Yisrael, where they're going to be grafting the pear tree onto the quince tree. So the Gemara is going to corroborate the opinion of Rav, and the Gemara is saying that a Brisa supports Rav, for a Brisa teaches that also the Bechayim. Now, what's going to be a Bechayim? And there's a book on Zerayim called Kilayim Zerayim. It's going to write that it does not have enough information to identify this plant. So we're not sure what this plant is. But nonetheless, this Bryce is adding a 5th plant, and that's going to be added to this list of 4 in the Mishnah. And if the Mishnah meant to arrange the 4 into pairs, this Bryce should have named the pear that adds to the Bechayim. In other words, if you're going to be reading it as a list, then just adding 1 more is fine, right? And you have 5, because they're all going to be like varieties of one another. However, if it's going to be read as pairs, as what the pairs are being read as pairs, as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying, well, then why didn't they pair it up, the Bechayim, whichever that is? Nobody really knows today what that is. They should have put it together with another pair. In other words, Rav has this idea that this should be read as a list of 4 or 5, and that is not to be read as a list of pairs. So, since the Brisa does not identify a relevant pair, it's holding that Rav is holding that it's to be added as a 5th, and that it's just a list of 5 things, and it's all together. So there's further support of Rav's opinion. It's taught in the Mishnah that does not deal with pairs. It says Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Bun, objected to the idea that the Mishnah refers to pairs. It does refer to pairs, right? But it's pairs of pairs. Anyway, the pear jokes and pears doesn't end, does it? So a Baraisa teaches that also the Rugianum. Now, what is the Rugianum? That's also going to be a thing that we don't know what that is today. That's what the Kilayim is writing. We're just not sure. But here, too, the Bryce is adding another item to this Mishnah without specifying a particular pear. So again, that might be another Brysa that is saying that these are not pears, but just to be read as a list. Now, the Gemara is going to quote a Brysa, and it's going to say that in the irrigated fields of Sipporin, they would graft branches of crostamlin onto the roots of the pear trees. Now, we know that in this Mishnah, that the crostamlin and the pear, that this Mishnah says that they're not Kilayim with each other. That's the opinion of this Mishnah. So here's how the story goes. One student saw them, and he said to them, "You're forbidden to do this. You're not allowed to do it." And then he went and he chopped the trees down. And then they went and they asked the rabbis in Yavna. Yavna, by the way, is where the Sanhedrin was at the time. And they were trying to figure out, was the student right or not? Basically, is this pear going to be a pear with the crostamlin or not? And the rabbis told him that the one who met you was from the disciples of Bet Shammai. In other words, Bet Shammai holds that a pear and a crostamlin are going to be Kilayim with each other. In other words, he's basically going to be saying that it's like a different variety, it's a different species. And the Halacha, by the way, follows the Mishnah and adopts Bet Hillel's opinion that these two fruits are not Kilayim with each other. So the student really shouldn't have chopped it down. Anyway, the Gemara interrupts to draw an inference from the rabbi's ruling, and it says, but they said only that grafting crustamil onto pear is permitted. But they did not say that grafting pear onto chizrar is permitted. And that implies that grafting pear onto chizrar is going to be forbidden. Now, what is the chizrar? Well, the pear is going to be having more in common with the crustamil. And again, Roman authors are saying that something like this is going to be like either a small pear or a superior, larger pear, and that the crustamil is going to have more in common with the pear than is going to be the chizrar. And we see that the chizrar is going to be like a kind of apple, and it's going to be something like that, or something close to it. So then we're going to get into the next case, and it's going to say that the Gemara resumes this Baraisa, and it says in Techum Ariach, this is going to be an area where, like a Techum, where you could walk, like, on Shabbat, and surrounding a place called Ariach, right? So it says in Techum Ariach, they would graft branches of apple trees onto roots of chizrar trees. And then one student came and said to them, "You are forbidden to do this." And they went and they chopped the trees down. And they went and they asked the rabbis in Yavna whether the student was right. And the rabbis told them that the student spoke correctly. In other words, they're saying that, the apple tree and the chizrar is going to be Kilayim with one another. And so the chizrar is not exactly like an apple, but it's going to be different. And that the Gemara is assuming that the chizrar has more in common with the pear than the apple, right? So by stating only that grafting a chizrar to an apple is forbidden, Rabbi Kanievsky is pointing out that the rabbis implied that grafting a chizrar with a pear should be permitted. So that's an implication. Now the question is going to be whether the pear and the chizrar can be grafted. That, by the way, is going to be unanswered. So the Gemara is going to draw this inference, right? And it's going to say that they only said about grafting the apple onto the chizrar, that the chizrar is forbidden, but they did not say that grafting the pear onto the chizrar is forbidden. And that's implying that grafting the pear onto the chizrar is going to be allowed. But again, that looks like it might contradict the ruling, but it's undeclared on what it should be. And the Gemara resolves this contradiction, and it says what happened happened. In other words, the rabbis of Yavna dealt only with the two cases that actually happened and were presented before them. and they're not talking about implications of what the rulings are, so that you shouldn't look at it in terms of a pear onto the chizrar. Now let's go back and look at what the chizrar is again. The chizrar, so again, in this list, we're talking about pears that are forbidden to one another because they're dissimilar. The apple and the chizrar is going to be in that list of what's forbidden. And again, the Rosh and the Aruch are saying it's difficult to identify with precision what this is. And again, they're saying that it might be some sort of apple or something similar to an apple. The Rambam says it's a medlar, but in other words, they're going to be saying that it's not going to be a variety, and it's going to be, because it's not a variety, it's like a separate species, that they're Kilayim with each other. So the Gemara lists this 6 different grafts and the products that are going to result from them. And the first 2 are quoted in the Brisa. And, this we see that, the Gemara is presenting these cases because they have practical ramifications. And, the product of a graft is going to be, is forbidden with each of its parents. So there are a lot of botanical aspects to grafts, and it's a whole science. But anyway, Gemara says that there's a brisa that teaches that if a non-Jew grafted a branch from a walnut tree onto the root of a peach tree, that although a Jew may not do so, in other words, the Jew may not graft this, the Jew may not go and make this himself, the Jew may take a cutting from the grafted tree and go and plant it in a different place. So this is saying that it's permitted to benefit from the result of grafting. And by the way, you can see that in the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh Deah 295.7. And basically it's saying that, even the shoots of or the fruits that grew from this grafted tree can be used. But you as the Jew are not allowed to do it. And if a non-Jew did it, the non-Jew did it. And, the question is going to be, coming up later, whether the Torah is going to forbid a non-Jew to graft trees. That's a Maloket Tanayim, actually. Some are going to be holding that, again, Maloket Tanayim, some are going to be holding that, in fact, the non-Jews it's one of the 7 Noahide laws, part of like the 7 Noahide laws. And so, basically, it's something that they're not allowed to do. And the Rambam is actually going to be ruling that a non-Jew is prohibited to graft trees. So the Rambam is saying that they can't do it, and but there are others who say that they can. Anyway, certainly the Jew cannot do it. Okay, but what's interesting about this Gemara, and it moves up this conversation for us, is what do you do with the product of a grafted tree now? Can you use it? Yes, this is what this is saying. Not only that, but you can actually go take the cutting from this and go plant it. And that's a big chiddush. Not just saying that you can use the fruit, but you can actually do that. Now, the Gemara is going to ask an interesting question. It says, what product results from grafting a walnut onto a peach? The Gemara answers, dark peaches. Now, I don't know if this is really true or not in terms of I've never seen this done before, but obviously this must have been done before because they knew about it. And so, perhaps, something's happening where it's not like a hybrid, right? It's not like, all of a sudden you have like peaches that are like half peaches and half walnuts. It's not talking about that. We know that it doesn't work that way. But the peach is not exactly the same as what it would be on a normal peach tree. I want to point out that, yes, you see here they have peaches. Where did peaches originate from? They originated from ancient China. And, we know that they have a Silk Road. And we know even that there was a spice trade. I mean, we see with Joseph being traded, and you see with the caravan of Arabs that there was an ancient caravan route. So some of these plants, had distant origins, like the peaches, and it ended up here in Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, the next part of the brisa concerns grafting vegetables, and it says that if a non-Jew grafted chard onto the purple amaranth, now the Rambam is going to be saying that this is something like an asparagus, and the Rosh Hashanah says that it's going to be a fenugreek. Those are very different, by the way. It says that although a Jew may not do so, he may take the seed from the grafted vegetables and go and plant it in a different place. That moves the conversation forward. Before you said, well, you could take the cutting. Now, can you take the seeds? And that is saying that yes, you can, not only from the tree, but also from this grafted form of vegetable. And if a seed were to grow onto this, you could go and do that. And the Gemara asks a question. It says, what product emerges from this? And the Gemara answers, garden orach. So, I'm not sure. I don't think that it's trying to describe that it creates a new type of plant. I think it's trying to describe that what comes out is a little bit altered and a little bit changed, and it's going to be similar to what the garden orach is. I'm not sure what the orach is, but Kilayim is saying that it's Atriplex hortenensis. Anyway, again, I don't think that they're talking about it becoming a mutation of it. I think that they're saying that this new grafted thing has qualities that are like that. Anyway, the Gemara identifies the products of more grafts, and it says if one grafts a shoot of a grapevine with a turnip, what emerges from it, a carrot. Again, the note here by the Vilna, not the Vilna Goan, but by the Chazan Ish, is that it's not talking about an actual grapevine, it's talking about some sort of vine and something that has the characteristics of a vine. And it's not, I don't think, talking about that a carrot actually pops up out of it, but it's saying that it will, this turnip will be changed, and that, it might not look like the bulb of a turnip anymore. Maybe the, bulb is going to look a little bit different. Then it says if one grafts fennel and celery, what emerges from it, parsley. Well, we know that fennel has this very willowy like leaf, and you can find the fennel growing wildly even as you walk around in Har Nof, and that parsley has this sort of willowy leaf as well. And basically, I think what it's trying to explain is that the combination will change the leaves. It will not exactly be the same. And I think that's part of the point of this, right? You are forbidden to do it because you are changing the divine plan. The divine plan was to have this kind of leaf and to have this kind of fruit and not that kind of fruit. And then you're not supposed to tamper with it. You're supposed to just, you grow it, you leave it alone. If you want to do selective breeding, that's one thing. That's not going to be grafting. But we're talking about doing something that, still stays consistent with the natural order, and doing these things that starts to shift things away from the natural order. That's what's going to be problematic. Now, the Gemara continues, says if one grafts almonds and terebinth, what emerges from it, says pistachio. Now, I want to point out that this is not talking about that this is how pistachios are made. This is saying that, just like we see that, in Masechet Sukkah in the Bavli in page 32, 33, where it's talking about the Hadas, and it uses the word dates, right? We know the Hadas doesn't grow dates, but we know it grows berries. And what it's trying to describe what happens if, these berries are first starting to emerge. And the term it uses is going to be dates. And so we both know that a Hadas plant that's used in the lulav doesn't grow dates. It's trying to talk about this bud. And over here, it's trying to talk about something that is not like an almond, and it's not like a terebinth, but it's going to be something where it's going to be a little bit different. And that's going to be part of the point. And then it comes to the next one. It says, if one grafts olives and thorn jujubes, what emerges from them is the jujube. I want to point out that in the Mishnah, we see that the thorn jujube and the jujube are going to be Kilayim with one another. It's really different. And again, this is not saying that with the last example, it's pointing out, says the Kilayim, that the jujube, the thorn jujube, and the olive are all, the three of them are similar to each other. But again, what it's trying to show out is that the fruit that you're going to be getting is going to be a little bit different. Now, I want to point out that today, they're doing a lot of things with manipulation of the genes of plants and things like that. And the message that we have here in Kilayim is don't tamper with things that are created by Hashem in the natural order. And I see that there's a popular philosopher named Nissim Taleb who talks very strongly about the dangers of doing genetically modified crops. And his argument is that, the crops that we've had all along have been grown for thousands of years through trial and error and through snowstorms and windstorms and through flooding and through drought. And the seeds that you result in have been honed with and grown with us. And this is what Hashem gave us. And his point is that by now modifying these plants with oftentimes even genes from insects and things like that, that what happens is you end up with something totally new that has not been created by Hashem in the natural world to fit in with the natural world and the environment. And what happens now is if you have hundreds of millions of people relying on this as a food crop, and if this food crop fails, you create a big danger for them. And the warning that the Torah might be saying about keeping away from Kilayim might be because there could be a tragedy on the horizon where you have a failure of food crop because you don't have enough genetic diversity of the plants and because you're now tampering with the natural order of the plants. And then what you're doing is you are creating it where all the farms have these genetically modified plants. And now you have hundreds of millions of people relying on those plants to work out. And if, something fails on it because it never, was part of the creation, it's something that was created in a laboratory by a person, well, then you have something that can endanger the lives of millions of people potentially. And that's his point. Anyway, the laws of Kilayim might be more relevant to the world in the future than you think. Have a great day.